Welcome back to the WalterPicks Fantasy Football Show here in person with Avery, our Commanders.WalterPicks creator. Pumped to get into this one, Avery. We're going to be talking about the Dolphins, the Miami Dolphins today. I think a lot of fantasy football value, in my opinion, to be had on this team this year, coming off a really disappointing season. And the vibes are definitely not great, I feel like, for Miami Dolphins fans heading into this year. And that's why there's a lot of fantasy value. And it all starts with Tua.
It does.
And one of the takes that I've had for a long time that I think has helped me in fantasy football and spotting values every single season, and this season is no different, especially here in this situation, is people often overestimate their ability to predict injuries.
Yeah.
This is one of the highest injury-prone sports in the world. Every single player has a really high injury rate, and I think we often overestimate how much more likely someone is to get hurt than the next guy in the same position. Like Tua, obviously, he's more likely to get injured this season than other QBs, but how much more likely really? Like every single quarterback that you draft could get a season-ending injury. That's the reality of football. And people are drafting right now as if they know as a fact that Tua is going to miss games this season. And that's just not the case. It's a slightly elevated risk, but it's getting more than factored into his cost. Yeah. And it's honestly getting more than factored into this entire team's cost, in my opinion, really in fantasy football, because we did see it all sort of fall apart last year when Tua went out. Pretty much every single one of these players on this team was tough to trust in fantasy. Achane was still, I think, usable in some of those weeks, but the receivers just completely tanked. Obviously, Tua's value tanked. This was, I remind you, last year, coming off a season where Tua led the NFL in passing yards. I'm not interested in Tua in fantasy. Has zero rushing ability. Yeah. He's going to be a complete zero in rushing. And we already saw him finish with the most passing yards in the NFL, and he wasn't a league winner that season. That just goes to show how important the rushing potential is in fantasy. So I'm out on Tua in fantasy. He's going drafted QB 22 on Underdog, QB 25 on Sleeper. We got him ranked above that at QB 19. I just don't think there's a league winning ceiling with the rushing potential here. I'd much rather take Bryce Young. Even Daniel Jones, I think, has a higher ceiling than Tua for fantasy if he's able to get that starting spot with the rushing potential that he has. And we've seen Daniel Jones' best fantasy season was better than Tua's best fantasy season.
That is true.
And Tua's best fantasy season, he led the NFL in passing yards. He's probably not going to do that again. But I'm more interested to talk about the rest of this team. I assume you're not super bullish on drafting Tua in redraft like me. He's probably going to go undrafted, in most drafts.
Yeah, I'm not drafting Tua. I typically like to draft for the fact that I'm not worried about injuries. You missed out on the Christian McCaffrey years when he wasn't injured. I draft on best case scenario. If you want to win a league, you need to be taking risks like that. And with this team, if Tua does stay healthy, there's some interesting players that we'll get into.
Yeah, and I just want to note quick, Zach Wilson's the backup here. This season, I've seen some positive sentiment around that. I think from Seth, our Steelers creator on the team, like he's kind of more bullish on the Dolphins because he's optimistic that if Zach Wilson plays, it's going to be better. I'm out on that. I think this team's completely going to tank again if Tua's out. I have no faith in Zach Wilson. I'm definitely not subscribing to that narrative that the backup QB situation is much better here. I just think Tua has a real shot to stay healthy for a season. But Devon Achane is a guy I'm very excited to draft this season. He's coming off a year where he finishes the running back 7 in points per game, right around where he's getting drafted this year at running back 6. After that rookie season where he had just absolutely unsustainable efficiency off the charts on lower volume. Last year, we see a larger workload for Achane. The only two running backs with a higher target share than Achane last year were Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. End of list. And that is a list I want my running back to be on. And I also think Achane is a very, very sneaky and underrated winner of the Jonnu Smith trade. Jonnu Smith 100%. Getting so many of these underneath targets for the Dolphins last year. I do think some that's going to flow through to Achane, and we're projecting that here as well in the WalterPicks app. We got him up as running back 4. I actually think he's one spot ahead of McCaffrey right now in our rankings. And I don't know if I would subscribe to that, but I mean, they're going to be similar probably in target share. At least there are two guys competing to be in top 3 running back target share. So yeah, in PPR, I absolutely love Achane. I think he's a great pick where he's going. Jalen Wright is the immediate backup for Achane. I don't hate him as a handcuff either. He did basically nothing as a rookie, like pretty disappointing. He was a really exciting, 99th percentile speed type guy out of Tennessee. That was an exciting prospect last year. Didn't really make any impact as a rookie but he has a similar archetype to Achane that if Achane were to go down, I do think Jalen Wright would be the direct replacement. So the Dolphins lose Raheem Mostert this offseason. They let him walk. He's on the Raiders now. They actually signed Alexander Madison from the Raiders, who's going to be competing with 6th round pick Ollie Gordon, who definitely is a capable goal line back. But like Ollie Gordon, Madison, they might split some of that Raheem Mostert role that wasn't that valuable last season. There's like some touchdown potential there, but this is Achane's backfield. I think he's locked into one of the safer workloads in the league and at a minimum locked into one of the best target shares among running backs. So I'm in on that. I think he could finish as the running back 1 overall with the target potential that could come here. So I'm definitely in on Achane where he's going. It makes me kind of like the back end of the first round, honestly, a bit too. Are you as bullish on Achane as I am?
I don't know if I would be as bullish to say running back 4, but I do believe there is a very real and very possible chance he finishes with the number 1 most targets and the highest target share out of any running back this season. If Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, maybe that'll be a different story because they've lost Deebo Samuel and who knows what's happening with Brandon Ayuk. But the receiving upside is 100% there, and there's really nobody else behind him. I think Jalen Wright is a great running back if he ever gets a run, but he had to play behind Raheem Mostert. There was a little bit of an uphill battle there. Then they bring in Alexander Madison this year. So it's not necessarily a clear path either.
Yeah.
Because they keep just bringing in new guys.
Yeah. The other thing with Achane that I like, and it was honestly kind of similar going into last season, is like there's still room for his workload to grow. I don't think he's that much different than Jahmyr Gibbs, honestly. He's on a slightly like scarier offense to be a part of, and he's attached to a QB with a little bit more injury risk. But his workload, he had a 45% rush share last season. You know, what happens if we see a 55-60% rush share for Achane on top of the target share? Then we're looking at a Christian McCaffrey type season. Like I think that's in his range of outcomes. Those are the types of guys I want to draft. And there's just not that many running backs in fantasy football like Devon Achane that I'm willing to take a stab at him in the first round. And he's often going in the second round of drafts too. He's going in the back end of the first, beginning of the second. I think that range of drafts for him makes a ton of sense in PPR leagues. Would you take Achane over Derrick Henry in a PPR draft?
I would. I think Derrick Henry is a great running back, but we saw last year his snap percentage is going down. He's on the field when he gets the ball, but he's not going to be there for those short dump offs, those broken plays that just get tossed out to the running back. So I think there's less of an upside for him. And Lamar Jackson, he did pass a lot. He had a lot of passing touchdowns last year. If that continues, I don't think Derrick Henry's a bad pick by any means, but I think the upside in Devon Achane is a lot higher.
Would you take Achane or McCaffrey?
I would take Achane over McCaffrey. If we're both assuming they're healthy seasons, that's one thing. Again, we should be drafting on best case scenario.
Yeah, I'm going McCaffrey there, 100%. McCaffrey at pick 7 for me, I think is the move. I think I would take Achane in round 1 very shortly after that as well. What about Ashton Genty? Would you go Achane or Genty?
That one's really close to me. I like the ability Ashton Genty has to just get everything in his backfield. Like it is completely possible he gets 20 carries and like 3 targets, 3 receptions a game. He's going to be riskier. It depends what kind of build you want in your offense. I think Devon Achane would be the smarter choice because we've seen what he can do, and I think the offense is a lot more polished. But I'm not avoiding Genty at all.
Yeah, it's a close call for sure. I lean Achane over Genty as well. I think Genty like really should be like the very beginning of second round pick, but he could lead the NFL in carries. Achane's not going to lead the NFL in carries, and Genty could have a bigger receiving role than I think people expect as well. Wasn't really involved much as a receiver in his last season in college, but we saw what he could do as a receiver in previous years. I mean, he's the Damian Tomlinson-like prospect.
Insane.
I'm just a little less certain about the Raiders offense in general, and a little uncertainty with the rookie. We've seen Achane's efficiency and target share potential, 2 years in a row basically now.
Yes.
So I think I'd lean Achane as well, but it's definitely close. But let's talk about these receivers a bit because some of the more polarizing picks, I think, in fantasy football right now. First, Tyreek Hill, who has been an absolute stud in fantasy football for so many years up until last season, where he took a decent step back, finishes the wide receiver 31 in fantasy points per game. I mean, he was a top 5 pick in fantasy drafts last year. It's crazy how fast things can change in fantasy football. But he was a top 5 pick in almost every single fantasy draft last season after an absolutely amazing year the season before when Tua led the NFL in passing yards. Obviously, a lot of that flowed through to Tyreek. This year, he's getting drafted in round 2 or 3 even in some drafts, like end of round 2. He's going at the back end of the top 12 receivers, wide receiver 12 on ESPN. Wide receiver 12 on Underdog, wide receiver 13 on ESPN. We got him at wide receiver 13. I'm very inclined to take him in best ball I am a little bit more skittish in season long, but this is the type of guy that can win leagues. And like I was saying when we were doing the episode on the Bills, like I want guys that can, if it breaks right, they can win leagues. There's a story, a path we can see where they are winning leagues. And Tyreek could be the number 1 overall wide receiver in fantasy football. Like that's still, I think, in his range of outcomes. So I'm willing to take him around his cost, like back into the round 2, beginning of round 3. It's tough though over some of the running backs that are often still there. Chase Brown, Breece Hall.
Yeah.
I think most notably for me, but how are you feeling about Tyreek? And then we can talk a little bit about Jalen Waddle.
The interesting part about Tyreek for me is more of how my fantasy draft goes and how my team is built more than it is avoiding or targeting Tyreek Hill. To me, Tyreek Hill is not as worrisome as a lot of people say. Again, finishing outside the top 30 wide receivers for a name that big is not common, and it's not a green flag at all. But I will say, and there is a story to be told, that Jonnu Smith took a lot from Tyreek Hill last year. Tyreek didn't have the best season himself, but we saw statistically a lot of Tyreek Hill's design plays went down after Jonnu Smith came into the offense and started doing what he was doing. So I think there is something to be said that now that he's gone and there is no real tight end threat for targets, I think Tyreek Hill will take a big boost in floor because of that. So I like him at his ADP. Again, with the build of my team, I'm not sure if I'm going to take him because there is so many good wide receivers when you get to the late rounds.
Yeah, I feel like the range he's going in drafts too, he's like right around this end of wide receiver tier where you could tell a story of this guy being the number 1 overall wide receiver in fantasy. And I mean, literally that season 4, he was the number 1 overall wide receiver in fantasy, 23.7 PPR points per game. That was wide receiver 1. That was more than Jamar Chase. That was more than Justin Jefferson. That was more than CeeDee Lamb. That was just a season ago.
Yeah.
Like really not that long ago. I know he's up there in age now. He's going to be 31 this season. And I got to admit, I'm having some PTSD about Cooper Kupp because we saw something similar with Kupp, right? Where he was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy and just a very steep drop off as he gets into his 30s. Tyreek is also obviously wins with speed, but he hasn't lost the speed.
No.
And there were several deep balls last year with Tyreek Hill just missed, an 80-yard touchdown.
Yes.
And a couple of those connecting is a pretty big difference when you look back at the end of the fantasy season. So I think some of that is also getting lost in the context on top of the time that Tua missed. Again, if Tua plays this whole season, Tyreek's probably going to do better than this cost. But Jalen Waddle, I think, is the better bet at his cost because his cost is way cheaper. I mean, you're frequently seeing Waddle in round 6. I've seen him fall to round 7. In PPR drafts, we've seen Jalen Waddle produce elite fantasy seasons before. Didn't happen last year. In a lot of the same reasons as Tyreek. I think Jonnu honestly probably stole more than Waddle than even from Tyreek Hill. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem too is the defenses were playing so much too high safety. It was just funneling everything to the middle on top of Tua trying to get it out just so fast because of his injury risk. But I'm pretty in on Waddle. I think one of my biggest targets in fantasy football right now is Jalen Waddle. Because of the injury discount that you're getting, the profile that we've already seen succeed. Jonnu Smith being gone, I think honestly helps Devon Achane and Waddle the most. They saw their targets per route run jump the most last year when Jonnu Smith wasn't on the field. And we're projecting him well ahead in the WalterPicks app right now too. It's kind of hard not to, even if you dock his efficiencies a little bit. He's up at wide receiver 22 in the app rankings. He's getting drafted at wide receiver 30, wide receiver 31. And in some drafts, like people are just so out on this offense because they think Tua is going to get hurt. They're looking at Waddle's performance last year, which was really disappointing. The last season, Jalen Waddle averaged just 10 fantasy points per game. I mean, a huge disappointment. Similar to Tyreek Hill, massive disappointment for where they were drafted just from what they performed the season before. Actually, a little bit of down year the season before for Waddle, too. Even when Tua led the NFL in passing yards, he did deal with some injuries that season.
He did.
But his first 2 years in the league, he was over 15 PPR points per game. In his second year in the league, we saw him finish as a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football points per game. That's the type of ceiling I want in round 6, in round 7, especially in PPR formats if you get some of these Jonnu Smith targets. So yeah, I'm pretty in. This is going to be, I think, a really consolidated offense around Achane, Tyreek, and Waddle. Not unreasonable to think those 3 can get close to 70% of the targets here. Like that is definitely in the cards in at least on a weekly basis, if not the whole season. The third wide receiver on this team is pretty up in the air. Malik Washington is, I think, who we're projecting there right now. They also signed Nick Westbrook. All I do is score touchdowns. Achane this offseason, who I think has a pretty good shot at that third receiver role. Really not too many other guys to note in this wide receiver room. Dwayne Eskridge, maybe, but it's probably going to be Malik Washington
I agree.
but like not a real wide receiver 3 kind of on this team, which gives me a lot of confidence in the target competition. Are you as in on Waddle as I am? I know I just went on a big Waddle rant there, but I'm pretty in on Waddle this season.
I think recency bias plays a really big part, probably bigger than we want in fantasy football. And a lot of times you have to be that guy that takes the risk that nobody else wants to take. Yes, the Dolphins were not great last year. Yes, Tua was injured. The team fantasy-wise did not perform. But this is the kind of situation that will win you a fantasy football league if everything goes right. And you're drafting as if everything goes right. So I think Jalen Waddle going almost outside the top 30 wide receivers, it's going to be pretty hard for him to not get that. I think his breakout candidate potential isn't insanely high either. There is a lot of question marks without Jonnu Smith in this offense. Yes, he was getting a ton of design targets, but maybe that was opening the offense up that much more. And we have seen Jalen Waddle have so many past injuries, eye injuries, leg injury, whatever it is. So there is definitely a negative connotation around him, and it's going to keep his value really low. I think he's fine in his ADP. Malik Washington, to me, is the clear number 3 wide receiver. He had his sparks in previous seasons. But there is a case to be said that Darren Waller is the wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I don't think I'm getting behind that at all. But I do think Darren Waller is intriguing in best ball at a minimum, because there's this dynamic in these big best ball tournaments where these tournaments started months ago.
Yeah.
And in the first half, basically, of the entries in all these tournaments, Darren Waller wasn't drafted a single time, right? Because he was retired. So you're getting an edge. If he does have a big season, you're getting a big best ball edge in those tournaments. So I've taken him there a tiny bit, and supposedly he's in good shape too. He was like training for some type of athletic competition when he was retired. He was pursuing a rapping career, of course, as well. But yeah, I don't think he's like that comparable to Jonnu Smith. Like a little bit more of the red zone threat, touchdown scorer than the yards after the catch, intermediate part of the field type guy that Jonnu Smith was last season. They did take a look at Noah Fant when he was a free agent. They didn't end up signing him, but that to me is also just a bit of a signal of some caution. Like there's still a chance Darren Waller does not make this team. Like that would not be that surprising. I don't think he's a lock to be the tight end 1. He's probably the best bet to be the tight end 1. But yeah, I do not think he's just going to 1-for-1 take Jonnu's role, and I do not think he's going to be the wide receiver 3. I think he's going to be firmly competing for this 4th slot after Achane, Waddle, and Tyreek on this offense. But it is pretty exciting for him to be back. Definitely a cool story to follow.
It's interesting for sure just to see the name back in the mix. Jonnu Smith's shoes are very big to fill. I don't think he's going to get anywhere near that, but it is interesting to see how they use him, because when he was in the NFL, he was very good and very efficient, but definitely not worth it in a 12, 14, 16 to be your tight end 1 at least.
Let me give you some ADP, some guys going around Jalen Waddle's ADP on ESPN, and you tell me who you're taking in these scenarios. Jalen Waddle or Jerry Jeudy?
I'm taking Jalen Waddle because of the fact that I do project and think the Browns offense will be bottom 5 this year. And statistically, wide receiver 1s and bottom 5 offenses have a very hard time finishing inside the top 24. I think it's a great situation for Jerry Jeudy if everything goes right. If Joe Flacco were to be the starting quarterback the whole year, I think it's fine, but that's just not going to happen. It's a carousel of quarterbacks. I'll take Jalen Waddle. Yeah,
I lean Waddle here as well. It's not very close in the projections we have in the app. They're back in ESPN ADP. Waddle's just slightly ahead. How about Zay Flowers or Jalen Waddle? Who are you going with there?
I'd actually go with Zay Flowers. I know there's another negative connotation around him and the fact that the team doesn't pass a lot. They are top 5 in every single offensive metric. They are going to score. I think Zay Flowers is a clear number 1 on that team. Bateman is great, but they're completely different wide receivers. I'd rather take Zay Flowers.
Yeah, I lean Jalen Waddle over Flowers. I think it's somewhat close, like the same ballpark of player. But yeah, the rushing volume on the Ravens overall with Henry, Lamar is not comparable to what we'll see with the Dolphins. And they do obviously have the 2 tight ends, Derrick Henry,
they do.
Bateman, and they signed Hopkins. I don't think he's going to have a huge role. But yeah, I don't think that the ceiling outcome for Zay Flowers is quite as big as the ceiling we've already seen for Waddle be a wide receiver 12 in fantasy, a top 12 wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. I don't know if we'll ever see that from Zay Flowers, because you need to score a lot of touchdowns to do it. And I'm just not convinced he'll have the reception volume or the touchdowns to really get there like Waddle will. How about Courtland Sutton or Jalen Waddle? Where would you go there?
I would say Courtland Sutton. Last year, he finished as a top 15 wide receiver. He's almost going outside the top 30 now, and all they did was get Evan Ingram. There's really no other target competition. Bo Nix is only getting better. The defense that the Broncos have is great, so maybe that's a case for RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins having a bigger role than the lackluster running back room they had last season, but Jerry Jeudy's still a number one option, and there's a big gap between him and Marvin Mims and everybody else on this offense.
Cortland Sutton, you mean, not Jerry Jeudy. But,
Oh, yeah.
But point taken nonetheless.
Yeah.
And this one's close for me. I think I lean Jalen Waddle again because of the ceiling here. And because you look at Cortland Sutton's season last year, and he did end really strong. If you look at his splits in the back half of the season, it looks better than this. But last season was the best season of his career in fantasy football and arguably just in general. 13.7 points per game. We've seen 2 seasons from Waddle being over 15 points per game. It was a career year in the touchdown rate column for Sutton, 9% touchdown rate. I'm not convinced he's going to necessarily be able to repeat that again. I think we just saw the ceiling from Sutton, and it was decent, and it was actually really good down the stretch. But to me, the ceiling is still a bit higher for Waddle. I'm willing to take the risk there as well. And by the way, on every single platform, Sutton's going to go before Jalen Waddle, and Zay Flowers is probably going to go before Jalen Waddle on basically every single platform as well. So I'm pretty bullish on Waddle. I think you're right around sort of his cost, based on what we were looking at here with the ESPN ADPs. And I think on Sleeper he's actually going even later than on ESPN. If what I'm looking at here,
it's a good value,
is accurate. Yeah, about 10 picks later on Sleeper, which is the case for a lot of different players. So you definitely got to understand the platform you're drafting on. But that does it for our Miami Dolphins episode here. I'm pretty bullish on a team that is definitely on the riskier side, and a lot of pessimism around this team. Mike McDaniels, I think, is the leading favorite to be the first coach fired. So my fantasy teams probably would not be in a good spot if that ends up happening. But I'm in on Achane, Tyreek, and Waddle being potential league winners here for the Dolphins. And I had a lot of fun with this one. Avery, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
My final thoughts is that Tyreek Hill is going to outperform his ADP, and I'll leave you with that.